Well, Uncle Mark,
Yes, Uncle Doug.
welcome back to my show.
Whoa. Whoa.
It's nice to
that's
have you on
fun.
for once.
That's fun. You know, kids, when the substitute is there for like a week because your regular teacher's getting, maybe a hysterectomy or something, and you think, oh, it's going to be great. This is going to be the whole time. And guess what? It's not. It's fucking not.
And eventually
Okay.
that crabby old teacher comes back.
Mrs. B comes back. You're fucked. This is you being fucked by Mrs. B. So I'm glad you had a good time, Doug, but, nothing lasts forever.
True enough.
Yeah.
Well, as some of our listeners might be asking, who are you? Apparently you have a who is that?
I have a who is that. So I'm going to explain to Uncle Doug and Uncle Dan, who's also with us.
Hi.
I think Uncle Dan is the only one who hasn't missed a week so far.
Yeah, that's true.
We're going to talk about a who. This is our new segment, Who Is That? And a couple weeks ago, we talked about his reverence, the weirdly necrotically appointed bullshit Dalai Lama. And this week, we're going to talk about a very important person you may never have heard of. Who has had quite a little bit of influence in these United States, or those United States that I can just see from where I'm sitting.
Right, yeah. You're not in these United States.
No, mercifully, I am not.
You're a foreigner.
And hopefully the fever y'all are having will break by the time I get back. So get to work on that. So today we're going to talk about the predecessor to your Rush Limbaughs, your Alex Jones, your dumb Tucker Carlsons, and probably most cogently your Glenn Becks. Yeah? So
Wow, really? We're putting Glenn Beck as our pinnacle of cogency in this list. That is a sad lineup right there, my
on
friend.
that list, that may be true.
It is a very, very sad lineup, and we think of these creatures, these guys like this, as kind of creatures of modernity in America, of cable broadcasting and Fox News and of course The Blaze, but
Yeah.
but they predated this kind of dumbery, kind of predated modern technologies. And, you go back to the founding of the Republic when there were ye old lonely pamphleteers that were passing out salacious things from the Gutenberg press. But somewhat after that, with the advent of radio, a few of them did pop up. And the religious broadcasting world existed long before your TBNs and your cable news and your Jim and Tammy Faye Baker. And one person that is really quite significant to this whole movement, if you want to call it that, was a guy named Charles Edward Coughlin, who was strangely enough, a Roman Catholic priest. Now, he became prominent on the air in the late 1920s and the 1930s, but which was not a time when there was a lot of love for Roman Catholics in this country. Right? It was.
Right, yeah.
So it's odd that he rose to such prominence because, remember, it wasn't until the election of John F. Kennedy that we even deigned it possible that a Catholic could be president and give allegiance to the United States rather than to Rome, right?
Huge mistake.
Boy, did that end up being wrong.
Huge mistake.
Exactly. And so now we decided just to put every Catholic in this country on the Supreme Court.
Right.
So this guy started, he's from, what's the horrible little town? Hamilton, Ontario. Now I know Hamilton, Ontario. It's a terrible town, and it would make anybody a crazy demagogue if they had a microphone and a radio. So he moved to the booming economy of Detroit, Michigan, and was appointed to a really tiny parish. And he decided that tiny parish really wasn't enough for him, so he managed to find his way to a local radio station where he'd give these rather fiery sermons. So he kind of started off with the just religious content, right? And really just speaking to the small, mostly Irish Catholic immigrant community of what would become the Rust Belt, right?
Sure.
But pretty soon he decided that he was an economic populist. So he began
really important for all priests and men and women of the cloth to take strong stances on the economy. That's a very important thing, I think.
Absolutely. If you are a professional clergy member of a basically ancient feudal society of hysterical virgins, what you should be talking about is the economy.
One that doesn't pay taxes.
Right.
Exactly. What you should be talking about is the economy, because you're in a cannibal cult. So he started this this minor revolution with this economic populism, where he originally in early in his career started weighing in 1930 on the side of Franklin Delano Roosevelt, trying to get Roosevelt elected president with the New Deal, because the Great Depression had completely destroyed the country. So the New Deal seemed like the only way out of it. Yeah. And he was famous for coining the phrase "Roosevelt or ruin," and the New Deal is Christ's deal. Right? So
what's Christ's deal?
What is the deal with Christ?
What's the deal with Christ?
What's the deal with Christ? So, so far so good. But as the 30s wore on, and I guess Roosevelt was not as piously religious as Father Coughlin would have liked him to be, and as fascism was rising in Europe, Father Coughlin's views took on a slightly strange complexion.
Oh no!
And he eventually turned against FDR, and began espousing some views, basically saying, in the way that Henry Ford did, saying some very nice things about Mr. Hitler.
Oh my gosh! Right.
And
Roosevelt is ruin.
Roosevelt is ruin. So he then founded something called the Nationalist Union for Social Justice, which was a workers' rights organization. So a lot of what he was getting at was, as he would constantly say, chasing the money changers from the temple.
Oh.
So in the parlance of the 1930s, who would you guess Father Coughlin thought the money changers were?
Somehow I knew this would end up with the Jews.
The Jews. It's always the Jews. So he started publishing he had a weekly newspaper in which he started publishing a serialized version of the Protocols of the Elders of Zion.
Oh,
so,
good.
Yes.
That's what you need, really.
Yeah. So I think we need to do a whole segment about the Protocols of the Elders of Zion, and really as a public service announcement to warn our listeners about the dangers of the international Zionist conspiracy.
Right, of course.
We'll have Eli on to do that. But for those of you who don't know what this horrible thing is, it was a early 20th century Russian forgery, kind of a Russian nationalist forgery, saying that someone had discovered this ancient manuscript by which the Jews were going to take over the entire world. So far so good. They're killing it with that. Later on, after he was discovered to be such an incredible anti-Semite, his views started to become openly anti-democratic, and he started calling for the abolition of political parties and even questioning the value of elections. So, kind of a crackpot, and his timing interfacing with the Second World War and how attitudes were about to change about intervention in the United States, etc., was unfortunate for him.
Now, you call him a crackpot, but I do have to say that after certain events of the last couple years, I'm questioning the efficacy of elections as well.
I second the motion.
Put. Well, that's why I'm bringing Father Coughlin on to say he was right.
That's right.
So even though he was, a bit of a crackpot, it's important to imagine a time when, look, we're three crackpots yelling into a microphone.
Yes.
But now there are millions and millions of microphones, and there's websites and podcasts and cable news channels, et cetera, et cetera. Well, in the United States of the 1920s and 1930s, there weren't that many megaphones, right? There were not many ways for a national audience to receive information from someone.
Yeah, in any given market, there were 4 radio stations, and that was about it.
maybe 4 radio stations, no television. There were newspapers, but if you were in a rural part of the United States, which was a large part of Father Coughlin's audience, you were lucky to get a few radio shows a week, his being one of them.
Right.
So his at the height of his listenership in like around 1934, he had 30 million listeners a week.
Holy cow.
And on some weeks, they think as high as 45 million. Now, in 1930, the population of the United States was estimated at 120 million.
Wow. So adjusted for population, those are How to Heretic numbers right there.
Exactly. That's that's just our patrons.
Yeah.
Right? So, he was talking to a quarter or more of the United States.
Wow.
With this really strange kind of nationalism. So here's I talked about the party he founded, the National Union for Social Justice. Here is some of the articles of faith that he wrote into their charter. Among those articles of faith were work and income guarantees, nationalizing necessary industry, wealth redistribution through taxation of the wealthy, federal protection for workers' unions, and decreasing property rights in favor of the government controlling the country's assets for public good.
Whoa.
Now,
It's kind of a
you
mess.
guys both went to college. What economic or political system does that sound most like to you?
That's a socialist thing.
Yeah.
That is a socialist thing. And yet he was fervent in his ranting and raving against socialism and communism. So I think that's a really interesting examination of the incoherence of nationalist populism, right? In the same way, it's very much like, look, I won't speak for Dan and Uncle Doug. I will speak for myself. I don't make my politics incredibly vague here on the How to Heretic. If my tailor would tell you I dress to the left, but the incoherence of like with Trump, right? That he's protectionist one day and isolationist, or an internationalist the next day, and now we're having this massive trade war that penalizes all of our allies, including Canada. Well, it does nothing to China, or et cetera, et cetera. It's just this doesn't make any sense because none of it is kind of an evidence-based ideology or an economic theory that has any research to back it up, right?
Right.
So all these things like a guaranteed income and wealth redistribution certainly sounded good to probably poor farmers trying to make it through the Great Depression, but it was essentially communism by another name, right?
Now,
It's kind of amazing this is one of the great capabilities of the human brain, which is to completely ignore very important data sets and then espouse conflicting ideas. It's an amazing thing it's a trick that we humans can do. It's very impressive.
So Father Coughlin was espousing these views in the mid-30s, yeah?
Yeah.
So Bernie Sanders was in his second term. Bernie burn! Boom!
Oh,
Hey-o!
well, goodbye, half our listeners. So, among his many slogans, one was less care for internationalism and more concern for national prosperity. Rolls right off the tongue.
Yeah.
Interestingly enough, if you spend 5 minutes listening to Alex Jones and don't blow your brains out as a mercy killing, or if you ever listen to Glenn Beck's more unhinged like chalkboard rants, Father Coughlin actually spoke well. He was not totally unhinged, kind of random psychopath. You can go to YouTube and get some of his speeches, and he speaks pretty well. He's a very educated guy. He did kind of have a little bit of a Kramer thing going on with his hair that he kind of got moving around like the thing on top of a rooster. So he looked a little goofy, but he did speak well, even though the populism he was espousing was kind of all over the map, right? Wow. So he became, because of his huge listenership and then his demand to, like Lindbergh and like Ford, to stay out of the war, right? To remain neutral because, that Mr. Hitler's up to something that might work out. He really was on the radar of FDR and even the Vatican. basically wanted him to shut the fuck up. And
Wow.
the Pope himself intervened to try to tell this guy to tone it down, and he wouldn't.
Wow.
And the local the cardinal of whoever was in charge of Michigan was actually sympathetic to him and refused to discipline him. So as this went on, when it was decided that the United States would break its arms embargo and its neutrality clause and begin the Lend-Lease program to give material goods to the Brits to help them win the war, and he inveighed against it, incredibly. Then when we started giving material support to Britain, it became enormously popular. He started to get hurt, and his numbers went down. And it was about that time that the Code Committee of the National Association of Broadcasters adopted new rules, which placed limitations on the sale of radio time to spokesmen of controversial public issues.
I
And
suppose
basically,
that law is no longer in effect.
this is when FCC licenses happened.
No kidding.
So basically, the Roosevelt, who was many things, but oftentimes not the greatest friend of the First Amendment, right? Who anybody who wants to look up Japanese internment can take a look at some of Roosevelt's less idealistic policies. And one of them was, let's invent licenses because the airwaves are a precious national resource.
Right.
And so basically they were invented to get Father Coughlin off the air. And
kidding.
and it worked. So he was kind of railroaded off the air, which I do think is kind of controversial because, that is the government basically limiting somebody's free speech. But he was a Nazi sympathizing shitbag to the extent that Dr. Seuss made many political cartoons at his expense as a fascist sympathizer. So there you go.
Wow.
That's Father Coughlin, who born in the 1890s and lived until the day Star Wars was released. So had a wonderful long life of demagoguery and being a Catholic priest. So
Well, there you go.
Rest in pieces.
All right. Well,
Rest in pieces.
That's that guy, I guess.
Yep. So next time you're enjoying some Alex Jones just to relax, remember you could be listening to it on an old tube radio in the farmhouse out by the holler, and it wouldn't be so different.
It's the way to do it. All right.
Yep.
Moving on.
Let's move on.